Ray Calloway pressed a crumpled receipt against the cold hood of his truck and wrote the 4 most expensive sentences of his life, knowing full well he couldn't afford a single word of them. He'd just put a 7-inch scratch across a $180,000 Mercedes. He had $400 in the bank. He had an 11-year-old son at home waiting for breakfast, and he had every reason in the world to drive away and never look back. But he didn't. What happened next because of 4 honest sentences nobody saw coming, not even Ray. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit subscribe and stay with us. This one goes all the way. The scratch was real. There was no arguing with it, no squinting at it, and pretending it was a shadow or a trick of the November light. 7 inches, maybe 8, running clean across the driver's door of the Mercedes like a signature deep enough to cut through the silver paint and show raw metal beneath. Ray Calloway stood in the empty parking lot at 6:18 in the morning, hands in his jacket pockets, breath coming out in short white clouds, and looked at it the way a man looks at a thing he cannot fix with what he has in his wallet. He did the math. He couldn't help it. It was the kind of math broke men do, automatically fast, brutal, final. That kind of panel, that kind of car body shop, minimum $1,200. More likely $2,000, maybe more, depending on whether the door needed replacing entirely. He had $436 in checking. He had a car payment 11 days past due, a heating bill he'd been deferring since October, and his son Marcus needed new winter boots before the snow came in hard. He stood there for exactly 45 seconds. Then he turned around, walked back to his truck, opened the glove compartment, and rooted around until he found the back of an old delivery receipt, the blank side just barely big enough. He found a pen under the seat. He flattened the paper against the hood and wrote his hand steadier than it had any right to be. "I hit your car. I'm sorry. I don't have much right now, but I will pay for it. My name is Ray Calloway. Here's my number." He tucked it under the wiper blade, looked at it once, and walked away. He didn't know there was a camera mounted above the parking garage entrance. He didn't know that the footage would be pulled not by building security, but by the woman who owned the car, who had already noticed the scratch before she noticed the note. He didn't know she would watch the footage 3 full times, tracking his movements from the moment he got out of his truck to the moment he drove away, paying attention to that 45 seconds, the way you pay attention to something that answers a question you've been asking for a long time. He didn't know any of that. He knew he was tired, his joints ached from the cold warehouse, and his son needed breakfast. Ray Calloway was 43 years old and had been operating on fumes for the better part of 2 years. Not the complaining kind of tired. Not the kind men use to excuse themselves from things. The deep marrow kind, the kind that moves in after loss compounds on loss, and you just keep showing up because what else is there to do, and eventually the exhaustion stops feeling like a condition and starts feeling like the weather. Just something you live inside. His wife Ellen had died 26 months ago. Brain aneurysm. A Wednesday. She was at work. She was a school librarian, was good at it, loved it, and then she wasn't anywhere anymore. 39 years old. She had a dentist appointment that Friday. She had a book she hadn't finished. She had a list on the refrigerator that Ray still hadn't taken down. He didn't talk about Ellen often. Not even to Marcus, who was 11 now and old enough to carry the loss in his own way, which mostly looked like silence. Long silences at dinner. The habit of standing at the window and looking at nothing in particular. The way he sometimes laughed at something and then stopped laughing like he'd remembered something. After the funeral, Ray had done what he knew how to do. He worked. He picked up a second job within a month, a third part-time within 6 months. He told himself it was temporary, just until he got ahead, just until things stabilized. That was a year and a half ago, and temporary had quietly become his life. The morning of the scratch, he'd just finished 7 hours on the overnight shift at a cold storage warehouse on the far south side, moving pallets, scanning inventory, breathing refrigerated air until his fingers went numb inside his work gloves. He had a side gig that morning as well, delivering office supply boxes for a small logistics company that paid cash and didn't ask questions. The drop-off was at a corporate building on Mercer Avenue. The gate to the lot was open. The lot was half empty. He figured 10 minutes. He hadn't figured on the Mercedes being in the adjacent space. He hadn't figured on swinging wide to avoid a pothole in the dark and catching the driver's door with his mirror. The sound was almost polite. A brief dry crunch, barely anything. The damage it left behind was another matter entirely. Marcus was awake when Ray got home at 7:15, which was unusual enough that Ray stopped in the doorway of the kitchen and just looked at him for a moment. 11-year-old boys who'd been up late doing homework, as Marcus almost certainly had been, did not as a rule voluntarily surface before 8. But there he was at the kitchen table in his pajamas, a bowl of cereal going soft in front of him, reading something on his tablet with the focused expression he'd inherited from his mother. "You're up early," Ray said, dropping his keys on the counter. "Couldn't sleep." Marcus didn't look up. "There's coffee. I made it." Ray looked at the coffee maker. It was full, still warm, the orange light blinking. He didn't say anything for a moment because there was a specific feeling that came over him when his son made him coffee, a tangle of gratitude and guilt that had no clean name and that he'd stopped trying to sort out a long time ago. "Thanks, bud." He poured a cup, leaned against the counter. "You eat, obviously." Marcus tilted his chin toward the cereal bowl without looking up. Ray almost smiled. The kid had Ellen's timing, dry, precise landing exactly where it was aimed. It used to make him laugh out loud. Now it made him miss her in a way that was so physical it felt like pressing on a bruise that never quite healed. "I need to sleep a few hours," Ray said. "You good to get yourself to school?" Marcus looked up then, just briefly. He had a small smear of milk on his chin that he was completely unaware of. "Dad, I've been getting myself to school since 3rd grade. "Just checking." "You always just check." He went back to his tablet. After a moment, "Ms. Peterson wants me to do the regional math competition next month." Ray sipped his coffee, made himself pay attention. "Yeah, that a big deal. Top 8 schools in the city compete. She says I have a real shot at placing." He said it the way he said everything, flat factual, like he was reading from a report. But Ray had learned to hear what was underneath the flat tone. Underneath it, this mattered. "Then you should do it," Ray said. "There's an entry fee." A beat. Careful. $20. The number landed. Small and exact. $20 was currently the difference between Ray's account staying positive through the week or going into the red before his next direct deposit. He did the math in about half a second and came up with the same answer he always came up with: figure it out. "I'll get it," he said. Marcus nodded. Didn't push. Didn't ask, "Are you sure?" or when. He'd learned not to push. He'd learned the way kids learn things they shouldn't have to learn this young, how to calibrate his own needs against his father's limits, how to want things quietly in a way that didn't cost too much. That calibration, that small habitual economy of wanting, was the thing that kept Ray up on the worst nights more than any bill or debt ever could. He crossed the kitchen, put his hand on top of his son's head. "You're gonna take that thing." Marcus made a face. "It's a math competition, not a boxing match. Doesn't matter, same principle." "That's insane," Marcus said, but something at the corner of his mouth moved almost a smile. Almost. "Get to school," Ray said. "I'm gonna sleep." He managed 3 hours and 20 minutes. He surfaced to his phone, buzzing on the nightstand face down, rattling against the wood in a way that sounded irritable. Unknown number, Chicago area code. He stared at the ceiling for a second. He got a lot of unknown number calls. Mostly they were variations of the same conversation. Polite voices from collections departments always addressing him by his full name, always beginning with, "We're calling regarding." He'd learned to let most of them go to voicemail, but some reflex he couldn't explain made him pick up. "Is this Ray Calloway?" A woman's voice, clear, composed, unhurried. The voice of someone accustomed to being in charge, who had made a deliberate choice in this specific moment to turn that down. Depends on who's asking, Ray said. His guard was still up from years of conversations that started politely and ended with him looking at a number he couldn't pay. My name is Diana Mercer. A short pause. You left a note on my car this morning. Ray sat up. The sleep evaporated from his body like steam off pavement. Ms. Mercer. He was already calculating, already moving. I want you to know I'm going to cover the damage. It's going to take me a little time to put together the full amount, but I will. I'm not someone who walks away from things. Mr. Calloway. Her voice stopped him, not sharply, not unkindly, the way you stop someone who's about to walk past the turn they needed to take. I'm not calling about the money. He waited. I pulled the camera footage from the parking garage, she said. I watched you get out of your truck. I watched you look at the car for, I timed it 45 seconds. I watched you go back and write that note. Ray said nothing. His heart was doing something he didn't have a word for. Do you know how many people would have left? She asked. He thought about it. Actually thought about it. Probably most, he said. Yes. Something shifted in her voice, a precision, like she was filing something away. But not you. I'm not other people, Ray said. The line was quiet for a moment. No, Diana Mercer said. You're not. Another pause, shorter. I'd like to meet with you. Would you come in? To my office? Ray looked at his ceiling. The crack in the plaster ran east to west, a hairline fault he'd been meaning to fix for a year and a half, which meant he never would. Ms. Mercer, I appreciate that, but I'm not sure what we'd be meeting about. Neither am I entirely, she said. But I'd like to find out. Thursday morning, 10 o'clock, 840 Wacker. Your name will be at the front desk. Thursday morning, Ray had a warehouse shift starting at 6. He could be done by 9:15 if things moved fast. He could shower change, get to Wacker by 10 if the train ran on time. Okay, he said. He still wasn't entirely sure why. Good. He thought he might have heard something in her voice then, not quite a smile, but the suggestion of one. Mr. Calloway, thank you for the note. She was gone. Ray sat on the edge of his bed, holding the phone with both hands, looking at the cracked plaster on the ceiling. What in the world? He said quietly to the empty room. 840 Wacker was the kind of building that makes you aware immediately and completely of your shoes. Ray had shined his dress shoes that morning, the black ones bought for Ellen's funeral, and worn maybe twice in the years since living most of their life, in a box on the closet shelf. He'd done his best with them. They were still the shoes of a man who spent his life on concrete. He wore his navy blazer, the one Ellen had bought him for their 5th anniversary, which still fit, because he hadn't changed much, which struck him occasionally as one of the world's smallest and most irrelevant miracles. He rode the elevator to the 14th floor, gave his name to a young woman at a front desk that appeared to be made of white stone, and stood in the lobby with his hands in his pockets, looking at the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and feeling without quite being able to stop feeling it like someone who had wandered into the wrong building. Diana Mercer came out of her office at precisely 10 o'clock. He didn't know what he'd expected. He hadn't let himself picture it too specifically. She was somewhere in her mid-40s, he guessed, composed in the way of someone who'd built her composure through years of deliberate practice, not someone who'd been born calm. Dark hair, a simple gray blazer, small silver earrings, nothing else. She walked like someone who didn't waste movement, like every step was going somewhere specific. She extended her hand. Ray Calloway. Diana Mercer. Her grip was direct, brief, no performance in it. Come on back. Her office surprised him. Big, but not the kind of big that performed power. Books on real shelves. Actual books, not decorative ones, several with broken spines from use. A round table in the corner with 2 chairs set at an angle that said, "Conversation, not interview." She gestured to one of them and sat in the other, and somehow the arrangement made everything that followed feel less like an audition and more like 2 people trying to figure out what they were doing in the same room. "Coffee?" she asked. "I'm good, thank you." She studied him for a moment, not intrusively, but directly the way someone reads a document they need to understand quickly. Then, "Can I be straightforward with you?" "I'd prefer it," Ray said. "Good." She folded her hands on the table unhurried. "I've been running this company for 7 years. In that time, there are 2 things I've consistently found almost impossible to hire for real competence and real integrity. Most people have one. Very few have both." She paused. "I watched that footage 3 times because you had every reason to leave and chose not to. And that choice was going to cost you. You knew it would, and you did it anyway." Ray kept his expression steady. "It wasn't heroic. I made a mistake. Mistakes should be owned." "Yes," she said. "They should, which is exactly why most people don't own them." He didn't argue with that. "Tell me about yourself," she said. He looked at her. "What do you want to know?" "Whatever you want to tell me." He thought about that for a moment. He wasn't used to the open question. He was used to forms checkboxes, 3 professional references. "I work 3 jobs," he said. "Overnight cold storage warehouse delivery side gig. Friday nights stocking shelves. I've got a son, Marcus, 11 years old. His mother died 2 years ago." He watched her face. She didn't perform sympathy, didn't overdo it. She just listened, which was, he realized, harder than it looked. "Before all of it, before Ellen died, before things fell apart, I managed a crew of 18 people at a logistics company on the South Side. 6 years. Best on-time delivery rate in the city for 3 of them." He paused. "Then the company got bought out, and the new ownership had their own people. They offered me a floor position. I took it. Then they cut the floor." He said it without bitterness. Just fact. "That's how those things go." "Do you miss the managing?" she asked. Ray looked at her. "Every single day," he said quietly. "I was good at it." "I believe you," Diana said. Not as filler. As something she was recording, committing to something she meant. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the table. "I have a position here," she said. "Operations coordinator. It's junior-level entry point, but it has a clear path upward. The person I hired 8 months ago relocated, which is why it's empty. I'm not offering you charity, Mr. Calloway. I want to be very clear about that. I'm telling you about a position that exists, that needs someone qualified, and that I believe you are qualified for." She looked up. "Based on what you've told me, and what I already know about the kind of man you are." Ray felt something move through him. Something careful, instinctively braced the way you protect something that has been hurt before. "What's the salary?" he said. She told him. He sat with the number for a moment. It was more than he made at all 3 jobs combined. It was more than he'd made since before everything fell apart. "Why?" he said. Not ungratefully, genuinely. "You don't know me." "I know enough," Diana said. "I know you made a mistake and owned it when walking away would have cost you nothing. I know you've been working 3 jobs while raising a child alone without anyone seeing it or giving you any credit for it. And I know that when you talked about the work you used to do, something in your face changed." She said it simply, without drama. "You have the look of someone who belongs somewhere better than where he's been." Ray looked out the window. Chicago below, gray and enormous, and completely indifferent to any of this. "I can start Friday," he said. Diana almost smiled. A real one, small and dry at the corner of her mouth. "Monday works. Let's not be rash." He laughed. Full and genuine, not the polite social kind, but the real thing, unexpected, coming up from somewhere below his chest. He couldn't have told you the last time he'd made that sound. He drove home on the expressway with both hands on the wheel and the radio off. He thought about the note. 4 sentences, back of a receipt. Written in 30 seconds by a man running on no sleep because the voice in his chest that sounded like Ellen said, "Do the right thing." Ray and he always had, even when it cost him, even when it made no sense. He thought about Marcus and the $20, and the way his son had learned to want things quietly, so as not to put too much weight on what was already weighted enough. He thought about, you have the look of someone who belongs somewhere better than where he's been, and the particular way it had landed in him. Not like praise. Like something older than praise. Like someone finally calling something by its right name. He pulled off the expressway, stopped at the corner gas station, bought a chocolate bar. Marcus was at the kitchen table doing homework. He looked up when the door opened, clocked the blazer, and went still in the specific way he went still when he was paying close attention but didn't want to show it. "You're still wearing the blazer," he said. "I had a meeting." "You said that." "A beat." "What kind of meeting?" Ray sat down across from him, set the chocolate bar on the table between them like an offering. Marcus looked at it, looked at his father. Something in his 11-year-old face was calculating reading. "The kind that might change things," Ray said. "Good change or bad change?" Marcus asked. His voice was steady, but Ray knew what that steadiness cost. He'd seen his son brace for bad news enough times to know what the bracing looked like. "Good," Ray said. "Real actual good, maybe the best kind." Marcus was quiet for a moment. He picked up the chocolate bar, turned it over in his hands, set it back down, pushed it back toward his father. "You eat it," he said. "You look like you need it more than me." Ray looked at his son. This quiet, serious, steady kid who had learned too early how to measure his own needs against the world's limits, and who still somehow kept choosing generosity anyway, and felt something crack open in his chest in the best possible way. He picked up the chocolate bar, broke it clean down the middle, put one half back in front of Marcus. "Split it," he said. And they sat there in the quiet kitchen in the late afternoon light, just the two of them eating chocolate and not saying anything, and it was enough. It was more than enough. It was for the first time in a long time the feeling of something beginning. Monday came the way important mornings always come, too fast and too slow at the same time. Ray was up at 5:15, which was nothing new. What was new was that he wasn't putting on work boots. He wasn't pulling on the heavy insulated jacket he wore in the warehouse. He stood in front of the narrow closet in his bedroom and stared at the 3 dress shirts hanging there like they belonged to someone else's life, and for a moment, he just breathed. He picked the blue one. Ellen had said it made him look reliable, without trying too hard. That felt like the right thing to be on a first day. Marcus appeared in the bathroom doorway while Ray was shaving, still in his pajamas, hair going in 4 directions at once. He leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed and watched. "You're nervous," Marcus said. "I'm not nervous." "You nicked yourself twice." Ray looked in the mirror. 2 small pieces of tissue paper stuck to his jaw. He hadn't even felt it. "Those are unrelated," he said. "Sure." Marcus pushed off the doorframe, went to the kitchen. Ray heard the coffee maker start up, that reliable click and hiss, and something in his chest settled just a degree. His son making him coffee before school on a Monday morning. Some things were solid ground, no matter what else was shifting. He came into the kitchen, tucking in his shirt. Marcus was leaning against the counter with a bowl of cereal, watching him the way he always watched things, with that quiet, precise attention that missed nothing and revealed only what he decided to reveal. "You look different," Marcus said. "Same face." "Not the face." Marcus tilted his head. "You look like you're going somewhere." Ray considered that. "I am going somewhere." "No, I mean like—" Marcus stopped, looked for the word. "Like you're supposed to be going there. Like it's yours." He shrugged, suddenly self-conscious, went back to his cereal. "Whatever. Don't be weird about it." Ray stood there for a moment. He thought about saying something. He decided to just pour his coffee instead, which was what Marcus would have preferred anyway. He left the house at 7:45 and took the train downtown, and the whole ride he sat with his hands on his knees and looked at nothing and let himself feel carefully the smallest possible amount of hope. The woman at Mercer Group's front desk, her name tag said. Priya checked his name against a list, printed a badge, and sent him down a hallway to a conference room where 6 other people were already seated around a long table. Ray took the only empty chair. Nobody spoke to him. They were all looking at their phones or laptops. He sat with his hands folded on the table and waited. A man came in at exactly 9 o'clock, mid-40s, compact, a quality of controlled efficiency about him that made you feel vaguely behind on something. He dropped a folder at the head of the table without sitting down. "I'm Garrett Walsh," he said, "Director of Operations. Some of you are new, some of you are transitioning from other departments. All of you report to me." He looked around the table without making it feel like a survey. "We move fast here. We don't have time to manage people's feelings about moving fast. If that's going to be a problem, better to know now." No one said anything. Garrett's eyes stopped on Ray. "Calloway." "Yes." "Diana tells me you managed a logistics crew on the south side." 6 years. 18 people. Best on-time rate in the city 3 years running." A brief pause. "Okay." He moved on, which was Ray understood as close to impressed as Garrett Walsh got. "Here's how we're going to do this. Everyone spends the first 2 weeks in observation mode. You learn the systems, you learn the people, you learn where we break down. Then you tell me what you see." "What do we do if we see something on day 1? Someone asked a young woman across the table, dark blazer pen already moving on a notepad. Garrett looked at her. "Write it down. You'll get your chance." He looked back at the table. "Any other questions?" Ray had approximately 11. He kept all of them behind his teeth. Garrett dropped a stack of papers on the table: org chart, system, workflows, delivery performance reports, going back 6 months. "Start here," he said. "I'll check in this afternoon." He was gone before anyone could respond. The woman with the notepad looked at Ray. "He's always like that," she said, not unkindly. "My name's Yvonne. I've been here 3 years. I got the same speech." "Does it get warmer?" Ray asked. Yvonne considered this seriously. "The coffee does," she said. "Second floor. Better machine." He spent the morning in the documents, and within 2 hours he'd found 3 things. Not by looking for them, just by reading the way he'd always read operational reports, the way you read a map when you actually need to know where the holes are, not just where the roads go. The first was a recurring 3-day delay in their Northeast distribution chain that nobody had flagged as a pattern because it kept showing up under different vendor codes, which meant it looked like separate incidents instead of one systemic problem. The second was a redundancy in the approval chain for mid-level supply orders that was adding an average of 31 hours to fulfillment on a category that should have turned around in 12. The third was a communication breakdown between the warehouse team and the scheduling software, not a tech problem, a people problem. 2 departments using the same system and inputting data on different timelines, which meant the system was always working off information that was a half day behind reality. None of it was catastrophic. All of it was the kind of slow bleed that organizations stop noticing after a while, the way you stop noticing a dripping faucet in your own house. He wrote it all down in a yellow legal pad he'd brought from home, and then he sat back and looked at it. "Observation mode," Garrett had said. 2 weeks. He looked at the clock. 11:47 a.m. He thought about waiting. He thought about the warehouse where every day you found a problem and fixed it before the next truck came in, because there was no point in waiting for the right moment when the right moment was burning. He picked up the legal pad and went to find Garrett Walsh. Garrett's office was on the 2nd floor, door half open. He was on the phone, but he looked up when Ray appeared in the doorway and held up one finger. "Wait." Ray waited. Garrett finished the call, set the phone down, and leaned back. "First day's not done." "I know." Ray stepped in. Set the legal pad on the desk. "I found 3 operational issues. I don't know if you've already flagged them. If you have, I apologize for interrupting. If you haven't, I thought you should know." Garrett picked up the legal pad. He read slowly. Ray watched his face, which gave nothing away, a skill Ray respected even when it was directed at him. When Garrett got to the 3rd item, something happened around his eyes. Not surprise exactly, More like recalibration. He put the pad down. The Northeast vendor delay. Our last outside consultant spent 6 weeks on this. He told us it was a supplier reliability problem. It's not, Ray said. It's a vendor code classification problem. The delay is coming from the same source tagged under 3 different codes because of how the intake team was trained 2 years ago. Pull the incidents with codes NE14, NE27, and NE31 over the last 8 months and stack them on the same timeline. You'll see the same vendor, same facility, same lead time window every time. Garrett was very still. You got that from the morning reading? Yes. That reading takes most people 2 weeks to get through. I read fast, Ray said. And I've seen this before. Different company, same problem. He paused. I'm not trying to show off. I just think you should know as soon as possible. That delay is probably costing you in the range of, he hesitated, doing the math in his head, 80 to 100,000 per quarter in downstream penalties and rescheduling costs. Maybe more. A long silence. Garrett looked at the legal pad again. Then he looked at Ray. Observation mode, he said, apparently means something different to you. I can wait until the 2 weeks are up if you want, Ray said. Garrett's mouth moved at the corner just barely. Sit down, Calloway. Let's talk about the approval chain. Diana Mercer found out about the meeting the same afternoon. She was coming back from a client lunch when Priya intercepted her in the lobby with the particular expression that meant something had happened that she'd want to know about. Priya had been with her for 4 years and had developed an economy of expression that communicated entire situations in half a second. Garrett called up, Priya said. He wants 10 minutes today. Diana read the expression. Good want or bad want? He used the word interesting. He never uses that word. Diana thought about that. Send him up at 3, she said. Garrett sat across from her desk and laid out the conversation. He was measured about it. Garrett was always measured, but Diana knew him well enough to hear what was underneath the measurement. She'd hired Garrett 6 years ago because he was one of the few people she'd met who was both genuinely rigorous and genuinely honest, who told her what was there instead of what she wanted to see. He found the Northeast delay in 4 hours, Garrett said, and not by accident. He understood the system well enough to see the classification error. That's structural thinking. That's not something you get from ambition or effort. You're either wired that way, or you're not. Diana was quiet for a moment. And the other items? All valid. 2 of them I knew about. 1 of them I didn't. Garrett paused. The approval chain redundancy. I knew it was slow. I didn't see where the hours were going. He paused again, which he rarely did. I should have. You're telling me a new hire found something you missed. I'm telling you, we hired the right person, Garrett said without defensiveness, without ego. Just fact. It was one of the things Diana had always valued most about him. I don't say that easily. After Garrett left, Diana sat in her office for a few minutes with the city outside her window and her hands folded on her desk, and she let herself sit with what she felt something she'd learned to do at the cost of years, rather than immediately routing it into something practical. She'd taken a chance. An unusual one by any reasonable standard. She'd watched a 43-year-old man in a parking lot for 45 seconds and made a decision that most people in her position would have called irresponsible, at best eccentric. Her board, if they knew the story, would have raised 17 different objections. But Diana Mercer had built her company on a belief she'd arrived at through years of expensive, exhausting mistakes that character, real character, was not something you could screen for with a resume, or a behavioral interview, or a reference check. It was something you had to see acted out under pressure when no one was watching and there was nothing to gain from it. Ray Calloway had acted in exactly that way, and he was, as she'd suspected from the second she watched that footage, exactly who he'd appeared to be. That almost never happened. She let herself feel the satisfaction of being right, quietly, briefly, and then she went back to work. Ray fell into the job. The way water falls into a shape it was made for, not dramatically, not with any particular announcement, just a settling into rightness that he felt in his body before he could name it. The hours were long. The problems were real. Garrett ran a tight operation with high expectations and limited patience for anything that wasn't specific, actionable, and delivered with evidence. Ray found he didn't mind any of that. He'd spent 2 years doing work that kept his body busy while his mind ran in circles. Now, his mind was engaged fully purposefully for the first time since before Ellen died, and the effect was something close to physical relief. In the 3rd week, Garrett gave him a team of 4 to coordinate on a supply chain optimization project. He didn't frame it as a test, but Ray understood it was one. He ran the team the way he'd always run teams, by listening first, talking second, making decisions clearly, and not pretending to know things he didn't know. By the end of the week, 2 of the 4 were working late voluntarily, which was in Ray's experience the only real measure of whether you were getting it right. He saw Diana occasionally in the elevator in the hallway, once in the break room on the 3rd floor, where she was incongruously making her own tea, because apparently whoever stocked the executive kitchen had gotten the wrong brand and she had a specific preference. He'd offered to check if there was more in the supply cabinet. She'd said, "Don't bother, I know where it is." They'd stood next to each other for 40 seconds, waiting for the microwave, not talking, and something about the ease of that silence registered somewhere in him that he didn't immediately examine. He didn't think about it. He had a team to coordinate a project to deliver, and a son at home who had, as of Thursday, officially registered for the regional math competition. The call came on a Tuesday night the 4th week in. Ray was at the kitchen table reviewing project files on his laptop when his phone buzzed. Unknown number again. This time he didn't hesitate. "Calloway," he said. "It's Diana." A brief pause. "I hope this isn't too late." He looked at the clock. 8:47. "No, I'm up. Is something wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." Something in her voice, not quite an apology, more like an acknowledgement that this was slightly outside the normal lines. "I wanted to call you directly about the Q3 vendor report. Garrett told me you flagged something about the Northwest supplier ahead of the quarterly review. He said you have documentation." "I do." "Is it solid?" "Yes. I can send it tonight if you want." "Please." A pause. Then differently, with less of the professional register, more of the person underneath it. "How are you settling in?" Ray leaned back in his chair. The laptop was still open in front of him, but he wasn't looking at it. "Better than I expected," he said honestly. "Your team's good. Garrett's exacting, but he's fair, which is the better combination." "He said the same thing about you," Diana said, almost word for word. That surprised him. He didn't try to hide that it did. That's a compliment coming from him. "It's the highest one he gives," she said. There was the sound of something, a chair, maybe a quiet interior sound, and he understood she was still at the office. 8:47 on a Tuesday night. "Can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask," he said. "When was the last time you did work that felt like it mattered to you?" He thought about that. The honest answer, not the polished one. "Before Ellen died, I think. The last year before she passed, I was building something with that team. Really building it. Every week felt like you were stacking something solid." He paused. "After I was just trying to stay above water." You don't think about the work meaning anything when you're just trying not to go under. She was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone formulating a response. The silence of someone who was actually hearing what he'd said. "Do you feel like you're above water now?" she asked. "Getting there," he said. "Good." The word was simple, careful, weighted with something he didn't entirely have a name for yet. "I'll look for the report tonight. Get some sleep, Ray." She'd used his first name. He'd used hers in his head already without realizing when it had happened. He noticed that, registered it, and let it be. "You too," he said. "Good night, Diana." He sent the report and closed the laptop and sat in the quiet kitchen for a little while longer than he needed to. On a Friday afternoon in week 5, something happened that Ray would think about for a long time afterward. He was walking through the main operations floor on his way back from a vendor call when he heard a raised voice. Not unusual in a busy office. But the quality of it made him slow down. It was coming from the small conference room off the main hallway door, mostly closed, and the voice belonged to a man Ray didn't recognize, talking at a volume that said, "I don't care who hears me. Keep telling me the same thing, and I keep telling you that's not the answer I need." Ray stopped. "You want to explain to me how this gets resolved, or do I need to go over your head?" Ray pushed the door open. Not wide, just enough. Inside, Yvonne, from his first morning standing with her arms crossed in a posture that said she'd been in this position before and had gotten very good at not showing how much it cost her. Across from her, a man Ray didn't know, mid-50s, red-faced in the particular way of men who use volume as authority, was leaning with both hands flat on the table in a way that was designed to be physical without technically being physical. Yvonne looked at Ray. The man looked at Ray. Ray stepped inside and let the door close behind him. He kept his voice completely level. "Is there a problem I can help with?" The man straightened. He had the instant recalibration of someone who wasn't expecting a witness. "I'm having a conversation with—" "I can see that," Ray said. He wasn't looking at the man. He was looking at Yvonne. "Yvonne, are you good?" Yvonne's chin came up just a fraction. "I'm good." "Okay." He looked at the man now. Steady, unhurried. "I'm Ray Calloway Operations. Who are you?" "I'm a client," the man said, pushing the word forward like it was a credential. "And I'm trying to—" "I heard what you were trying to do," Ray said. "If you have concerns about service, I'm happy to sit with you right now and work through it. That's my job." He pulled out a chair, sat down, put his hands on the table. "But the way you were having this conversation isn't something I can let continue." He said it without heat, without apology, with the particular quality of a man who has managed people for 6 years and knows exactly how much authority is in stillness. A silence. The man looked at him. Ray looked back. Whatever the man found in Ray's face, it was apparently enough. He unclenched. He sat down. The color in his face began to recede. "There's been a delay with my last 3 shipments," he said. "Okay," Ray said. "Let's look at it." He spent 20 minutes with the man, pulled up the order history on his phone, identified a sync error in the scheduling system. The same communication breakdown he'd flagged in week 1 still being worked through, and arranged for a senior logistics coordinator to call the man Monday morning with a resolution plan. By the end, the man's voice was 20 degrees lower, and he was using complete sentences again. Yvonne walked out with Ray afterward. They stood in the hallway, and she let out a slow breath. "He does that sometimes," she said quietly. "Every few months. Garrett knows, but he's been a client for 12 years. "I know," Ray said. "I read the account file." She looked at him sideways. "You read every client account file?" "The problem accounts, yes." He started walking. "You should have called someone the second he started." "I've been handling that kind of thing for 3 years," she said, a little stiffness in it. "I know you have," he said. "That's not what I meant. I meant you shouldn't have to handle it alone." He glanced at her. "That's what the team is for." Yvonne was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. He went back to his desk. He thought about the way her chin had come up when he'd asked if she was good. The way people hold themselves when they've been fighting on their own for a long time, and someone asks for the first time in a while if they're all right. He recognized it because he lived in it. He thought about Diana's voice on the phone the night before. "Do you feel like you're above water?" And he thought about how long a person could tread water before they forgot what solid ground felt like under their feet. He was remembering. Slowly, 1 week at a time, he was remembering. And he was still only just beginning. The Northwest supplier report landed exactly the way Ray said it would. The quarterly review was on a Thursday. Garrett ran it the way he ran everything. Tight, methodical, no tolerance for padding. 8 people around the table. Laptops open, 3 screens worth of data projected at the front of the room. Ray sat in the middle of the table and didn't say anything for the first 40 minutes, which was the right call. He'd learned early in his career that the first thing you do in a room where you're still building credibility is let the room show you who it already trusts. When the Northwest supplier came up 37 minutes into the meeting right where Ray had predicted it would fall, tucked inside a broader distribution performance review, he watched Garrett lay out the numbers with the same flat precision he brought to everything, and then he watched the room receive them as if they were expected, as if the pattern was just the weather, something you noted and moved past. Ray set his pen down. "Can I add something?" Garrett looked at him. "Go." "Those numbers aren't random variation. There's a materials sourcing delay that's been compressing every 4th fulfillment cycle for the past 2 quarters. It shows up as a different vendor issue each time, because the intake classification tracks symptom rather than cause." He pulled up the documentation on his laptop and pushed it toward the center of the table. "If we reclassify and route the order upstream to the primary supplier on cycles 1 and 3 instead of 4, the compression disappears. I ran the model last week. We recover 16 to 18 days of lead time annually, which translates to..." He looked at the numbers he'd prepared, approximately $120,000 in downstream penalty reduction per year. Conservative estimate. The room was quiet. Garrett looked at the screen for a long moment. Then he looked at Ray. "How long did this take you?" "The analysis 4 hours. Ray paused. "Finding it took about 20 minutes. It was in the data. Just needed someone to read it that way." Somebody across the table made a sound, not quite a laugh, but the kind of exhale that comes out when someone says something you were already thinking, but couldn't articulate. Yvonne, who had been quiet on the far side of the table, was writing something fast in her notebook. "All right," Garrett said. "Calloway put together a full implementation proposal by end of next week. Yvonne, you're coordinating." He moved on, just like that. But after the meeting in the hallway, he stopped Ray with 2 fingers briefly on his arm, almost nothing, barely a gesture, and said without breaking stride, "Good work." From Garrett Walsh, those 2 words were a standing ovation. Diana heard about it from Garrett that afternoon. He sent her a summary email, 3 sentences, which was long for Garrett, and attached Ray's documentation. She read it once, read it again, and then did something she didn't usually do in the middle of the workday. She closed her laptop and sat with it. 7 years. She'd built this company from 11 employees in a rented co-working space to 93 people in a building with their name on the directory, and in those 7 years she had hired, by her best count, somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 people. She had been wrong a significant number of times. She had hired people who interviewed beautifully and delivered mediocrity. She had promoted people on instinct and watched them collapse under the weight of the responsibility. She had also been right enough times to keep the company growing, keep the mission intact, keep the thing she'd built from becoming the kind of organization she'd left twice before joining nothing. She was right about Ray Calloway. She had known it the moment she watched that parking garage footage, not the note itself, but the 45 seconds before it, the long stillness of a man doing math he couldn't afford and choosing to do the right thing anyway. She had known it, and she had acted on it. Which was, she thought now, one of the few decisions she'd made in the last 2 years that felt entirely clean. She opened her laptop again. Then she closed it again. She picked up her phone and called Priya. "Clear Thursday evening," she said. "The Lakeview presentation is Thursday evening. After that, you have nothing." "Good," Diana said. "Keep it that way." She found him on the operations floor at 5:45, the only person left in his section jacket, off sleeves, rolled to the elbows, working through something on his screen with the focused absorption of a man who had genuinely forgotten what time it was. She stood at the edge of the room for a moment and just observed the set of his shoulders, the slight movement of his lips as he read the legal pad beside the keyboard, full of his handwriting tight and angular, running slightly uphill, the way handwriting does when you're thinking faster than your hand can go. Calloway. He looked up, registered her there, recalibrated without visible effort, straightened slightly. Diana. Have you eaten? He glanced at the clock on his screen. His expression said the answer was no, and also that he hadn't noticed until just now. I was going to stop on the way home. There's a place 2 blocks from here, she said. Nothing fancy. Good food. I'd like to talk to you about a project idea I've been sitting on. She said it plainly, not an order, not quite an invitation, the space between the two. If you're free. He looked at the screen, then at her. Give me 5 minutes to send this. She waited in the lobby. When he came off the elevator, he'd put his jacket back on and run his hand through his hair, and the small automatic effort of it, the way a person straightens themselves before they walk into something that matters, was something she noticed without intending to, and chose not to think about immediately. The restaurant was the kind of place with paper on the tables and no music loud enough to talk over, which was the only kind of restaurant Diana ever chose for working dinners. They ordered quickly. She'd been here enough times that she knew what she wanted without looking. And then she leaned her forearms on the table and looked at him, with the directness he'd noticed from the first day, the eye contact, that was attentive without being aggressive, reading rather than performing. I've been thinking about a new division, she said. Client operations. Right now, we handle post-contract client management through the general operations team, which means it gets deprioritized whenever there's an internal crisis. 2 weeks ago, we came close to losing the Hartfield account because of it. You know about Hartfield. I read the file, Ray said. She didn't quite smile, but something registered. Of course you did. She picked up her water. I want to build a dedicated client operations team. 6 people direct-to-client accountability, able to respond in real time rather than queuing behind internal priorities. She paused. I want you to build it. Ray went still. Not visibly. He was good at not going visibly still, but she caught it anyway, the way you catch a half-second of a person's face before the professional self reassembles. I've been here 6 weeks, he said. I know. Garrett is my direct supervisor. This feels like a conversation that should include him. It will, she said. I'm having it with you first because it's your decision before it's Garrett's conversation. She set the glass down. I don't want to put someone in this role who doesn't actively want it. I've done that before and it's a waste of everyone's time. Her voice was direct, but not unkind. Do you want it? The question landed in him somewhere specific. Do you want it? Not can you handle it? Not what's your 5-year plan? Not sell me on your qualifications. Just do you want it? Ellen used to ask him that, not often, but on the nights when he'd come home frustrated, circling something in his head that he couldn't name, she'd put her hand on his arm and say, But do you want it? Ray actually want it, and somehow the question always got to the thing faster than anything else. Yes, he said. I want it. Then we'll talk to Garrett Monday morning, Diana said. She picked up her fork. Tell me about Marcus. The shift surprised him from business to this so cleanly, like she'd opened a second door in a room he thought only had one. What do you want to know? Garrett mentioned you left early one afternoon last week. He said when he asked you told him your son had something. The regional math competition, Ray said. He placed second. She stopped. Second out of how many schools? 8. And he's 11, so... That's remarkable, she said. And the way she said it, without the particular performance of an adult, complimenting a child's achievement, just the flat, honest weight of it made something in his chest loosen. He's remarkable, Ray said simply. He got that from his mother. She didn't rush past it, didn't redirect. She just let it sit there, respected the weight of it. After a moment, what was she like? He looked at his food. The question was one he still had to choose to step into rather than around. But there was something about Diana's quality of attention, that focused, unhurried listening, that made the stepping less difficult than it usually was. Ellen was organized, he said. To a degree that was almost funny. She had a system for everything, color-coded her shelves, kept a running grocery list on a whiteboard alphabetized. He paused. But she also had this quality, I don't know how to say it exactly, where she made everything feel like it was worth doing right. Not perfectly, just right. Like every ordinary thing deserved to be done with intention. He picked up his fork. I think that's what Marcus got from her. That precision. That seriousness about things that other people treat as small. Diana was quiet for a moment. She sounds like someone who knew how to pay attention. She was the best at it, Ray said. They ate for a few minutes without talking, and it was the same kind of easy silence he'd noticed in the break room weeks ago, the kind that felt somehow like its own form of conversation. He got home at 8:30. Marcus was at the kitchen table. Homework technically in front of him, but his attention was somewhere else, that 1,000-yard look he got sometimes, usually when he was processing something too large to hold quietly. Ray dropped his keys, poured himself a glass of water, sat down across from him. He didn't say anything. He'd learned that with Marcus, the way in was patience. After a minute, Marcus looked at him. You went out. Working dinner. With who? Diana Mercer, my boss. Something moved in Marcus's face, quick calculating the way he worked through a math problem pulling variables. The CEO. Yes. Another beat. That's not really a working dinner kind of person. Ray looked at him. What does that mean? I just mean. Marcus pulled at the corner of his notebook. CEOs don't usually go to dinner with operations coordinators. I have a title now. Dad. I know what you mean. Ray turned his glass on the table. She's... He stopped. Considered. She's a serious person. She takes her company seriously. She takes the people in it seriously. That's who she is. He paused. It was dinner about a project. Marcus looked at him for a moment, with the expression he used when he was deciding whether to push or not. He decided not to. He went back to his homework. Then, after another minute without looking up, is she nice? The question was careful. The kind of careful that told Ray exactly what was actually being asked and what weight it carried beneath the surface. Yeah, Ray said. She's good people. Marcus wrote something in his notebook, said nothing else. Ray sat there a while longer finishing his water, and he thought about the way his son had asked so carefully, so exactly, measuring the weight of a question about a woman his father had had dinner with at 8:30 on a Thursday night, 6 weeks into a new job. He thought about the precision of it, the seriousness of a kid who had already lost the most important person in his world, and who watched with absolute attention for any sign that the world was about to rearrange itself again. He thought, I need to be careful. And then he thought careful about what exactly. He didn't have an answer that felt simple enough to trust. The client operations proposal took Ray 1 week to build and 15 minutes to present. He put it together the way he'd learned to build anything important skeleton: first stress test the skeleton, then add the weight only where it would hold. 6 people-specific roles. A response protocol that integrated with the existing operations workflow instead of running parallel to it. He built in a review mechanism at 60 and 90 days so the structure could be adjusted without having to be torn down and rebuilt. He anticipated the 3 objections Garrett would have and answered them in the document before the meeting. Garrett read it cover to cover, which took 9 minutes. He asked 4 questions. Ray answered them. Garrett said, I would have built it differently in one place, and pointed to the escalation chain. Where? Ray said. Here. You've got a 3-step escalation for client-critical issues. 2 steps is faster, and the 3rd step adds process without adding value. Ray looked at it. You're right, he said. Garrett looked at him. You're not going to argue that? It's a better way, Ray said. Why would I argue it? A pause. Most people argue it. Most people care more about being right than about the thing working, Ray said. I care about the thing working. Garrett made a sound that was the closest thing to a laugh Ray had ever heard from him. He picked up his pen. Fix the escalation chain and send it to Diana by end of day. Diana approved it the following morning. She sent him a brief email, 3 lines her equivalent of a paragraph, and in the last line she added, "You built something real here. Well done." He read it twice and then got back to work. But the word sat with him. Something real. He turned the phrase over during the afternoon between calls in the margins of other thinking. He was used to working hard. He was not, he realized, used to having it named. 2 years of triple shifts and nobody in a position to name what he was doing or what it cost. And then in the space of 6 weeks, someone was looking directly at the work and calling it what it was. He understood in some newly clarified way what that had been costing him. The invisibility. The sustained effort that fell into a void every day and left no mark. He hadn't let himself name that either. He sent Diana a reply that was also brief. Thank you. Let's build it right. The team came together over the following 3 weeks. He hired from inside where he could, which was how Yvonne ended up as his deputy on the client operations team. A conversation that took less than 4 minutes, because she'd been doing the work without the title for 18 months, and both of them knew it. About time, she said when he offered it. Yep, he said. She smiled the first full smile he'd seen from her, without the measured quality she usually kept on. You know Garrett's going to take credit for this. Garrett should take credit for this, Ray said. He fixed the escalation chain. Yvonne laughed. God, you're going to be impossible to work for. Probably, he said. You in. Obviously, she said. The other 4 came from a mix of internal transfers and 2 external hires, people Ray interviewed himself using the same basic method he'd always used. Give them a real problem, not a hypothetical one, and watch how they think. Not what answer they arrive at, how they think. The path, not the destination. By the end of the team's first full week, the Hartfield account had been stabilized. 2 other accounts that had been flagging in the system were responding, and the escalation queue that had been running at a 14-day average response time was down to 3. Garrett sent him a single-sentence email. The escalation numbers are going to be embarrassing for the previous system. Ray replied, That's the point. He ran into Diana in the elevator on a Friday afternoon in week 9. She was coming up, he was going down. The doors opened, they registered each other, and he stepped in. The doors closed. You're here late, he said. I'm always here late on Fridays. She pressed the lobby button. Accounting review. It's the price of being the person who signs the checks. He almost smiled. How is it? Accounting review. Friday generally. She considered the question. He liked that about her. She actually considered things rather than performing consideration. Better than it's been in a while, she said. The client operations numbers are making the weekly report look different. Garrett sent me the Hartfield analysis this morning. It was a team effort. Garrett told me that too. He also told me it was your framework that made it possible. She looked at him. You can take a compliment, Ray. You don't have to distribute it every time. That surprised him into something between a laugh and a breath. Force of habit? Your team will be fine whether you take the credit or not, she said. They know who built the thing. The elevator stopped. The doors opened to the lobby. She stepped out, then paused and turned. How's Marcus? The question arrived the way it always did, from her directly without preamble, as if his son were simply part of the conversation's natural territory, which had somehow without announcement become the case. He's good. He's been different lately. Ray stepped out of the elevator, letting the doors close behind him. Less quiet. He joined the robotics club at school. Didn't tell me he'd applied. Just came home and said, I got in like it was a grocery item he'd checked off. Diana's expression softened, in the way that happened whenever Marcus came up, a warmth that was specific rather than general. "That's big," she said. "The keeping it to himself part." He looked at her. "That's the part you focused on. That's the part that means something," she said. "He did it on his own first, before he told you. He's building something of his own." She paused. "That's a kid who's coming back to himself." Ray stood with that for a moment. He hadn't had the words for it exactly, but she'd put them right where they belonged. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That's exactly what it is." They stood there in the lobby for a moment, the building emptying around them. Friday evening pulling people toward the revolving doors and out into the city, and neither of them moved immediately, which was something neither of them immediately acknowledged, and which both of them in the privacy of their own chests were aware of. "Have a good weekend," Diana said. "You too," Ray said. He walked out into the cold and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, hands in his jacket pockets, and thought about what she'd said, a kid who's coming back to himself, and he thought with a clarity that arrived like cold water that the same was true of his father. He was coming back to himself too, week by week, decision by decision, in the quiet accumulation of good work and honest connection. He was finding the shape of the man he'd been before everything broke open, and discovering with some surprise that the shape was larger than he'd remembered. He wasn't all the way back yet, but he could feel the ground under his feet now solid and specific, and that was more than he'd had in a long time. He turned up his collar against the wind and walked toward the train. The thing about proximity is that it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with a warning, doesn't come with a clean moment where you can look at yourself and say, "Here is where it started." Not when it's the real kind, the kind that builds through weeks of shared work and late evenings, and the specific intimacy of being trusted with someone's problems. It accumulates instead the way interest accumulates, quietly and without drama, until one day you do the math and find that what you thought was nothing has become something considerable. Ray understood this in a theoretical way by week 10. By week 12, it wasn't theoretical anymore. It wasn't one thing. That was the part he kept coming back to, kept trying to identify and failing to, because there was no single moment he could point to and say that was it. It was the Tuesday conference call where they'd disagreed openly about a vendor contract, and she'd pushed back on his position hard and completely without ego. And when he'd revised his thinking, mid-call, she'd moved on without making anything of it. No satisfaction, no performance of graciousness, just forward motion. It was the afternoon she'd appeared at the door of his office now with his name on the placard, a thing he still passed every morning with a quiet disbelief, and dropped a file on his desk and said, "I need your read on this before tomorrow, and I trust yours more than anyone else's on it," and then left before he could respond. It was the Thursday she'd called him from what turned out to be her car stuck in traffic on the drive to talk through a board presentation, and somewhere in the middle of the conversation they'd stopped talking about the board presentation, and he wasn't entirely sure when that had happened. It was small things and large things, and the way they had accumulated into a weight he was increasingly carrying without knowing exactly what to call it. He didn't do anything about it. That was the other side of the equation, the practical, deliberate management of a feeling he had decided with full awareness to keep strictly inside himself. He had a team of 6 who depended on his judgment. He had a son at home who had just started trusting the ground to stay solid again. And he worked for Diana Mercer, which meant that everything he was professionally, in the only context where he'd rebuilt himself back to standing, existed in a structure she had created and could, with one decision, remove. He was not going to be that man. The one who mistakes professional closeness for personal invitation. The one who misreads things. He had watched that happen to other people his whole career, and understood precisely the damage it caused, and he had not come this far by being careless with the things that mattered. So he worked. He managed. He went home at the end of the day and sat with Marcus and asked about robotics, and ate whatever food he'd managed to pull together and slept 6 hours and came back the next morning and did it again. And it was fine. It was more than fine. It was, he told himself, exactly enough. He almost believed it. The crisis came on a Wednesday in the 11th week, and it came from a direction nobody had seen. Ray was in the middle of a client call. A difficult one, a long-standing account that had been bleeding slowly for months, despite the team's interventions, when Yvonne appeared in the doorway of his office and made the hand signal she used when something was wrong enough to interrupt anything. He wrapped the call in 4 minutes, which was fast, and came out. Yvonne handed him her phone without a word. It was a news article. Chicago Business Insider posted 47 minutes earlier. The headline was clean and brutal. Mercer Group faces board challenge as senior investor calls for leadership review. He read it standing in the hallway. The article was 300 words. The substance was this: a man named Howard Price, who held a 12% stake in Mercer Group and had been on the peripheral edge of the company's investor structure for 4 years, had formally called for a board review of Diana's performance as CEO, citing what the article described as strategic inconsistency in recent hires and expansion decisions. The article quoted no one directly from the board. It quoted Price once briefly, something about returning the company to its core discipline. It cited specifically the rapid expansion of the client operations division as an example of what Price called impulsive structural change driven by sentiment rather than data. Ray read that line 3 times. Then he handed the phone back to Yvonne and walked to the stairwell. He needed 60 seconds to think without anyone watching him think. He took them. He stood in the stairwell with his hands on the metal railing and ran through it fast. What was real? What was noise? What mattered? What he could do? What he shouldn't do? The article was thin. One source. One quote. No board confirmation. That meant either it was a trial balloon from Price to test reaction, which was strategic and solvable, or it was the visible surface of something that had been moving underneath for longer than anyone outside the boardroom knew, which was more serious. He didn't have enough information to know which one yet. He went upstairs. Priya was at her desk outside Diana's office, and her expression told him everything before he said a word. The door was closed. Through the glass panel beside it, he could see Diana on her phone, standing, which she never did when she was seated at her desk, which meant she was moving through something with all of her focus. "She's with the board chair," Priya said quietly. "How long?" 18 minutes. He nodded. He went back to his office and sat down and opened the Mercer Group financial performance files he'd been building since his 3rd week. The kind of numbers he compiled for himself, the way you keep a certain kind of knowledge sharp, because you never know when you're going to need it. He spent 40 minutes building a performance summary for the client operations division before and after metrics, revenue, impact, client retention numbers, response time, improvement, account, stabilization data. He made it airtight. He made it the kind of document that answered the specific language in the article point by point with numbers that didn't need interpretation. Then he printed it, put it in a folder, and went back upstairs. Diana's door was open now. She was at her desk, her laptop open, her posture the specific quality of controlled composure that Ray had come to recognize as the thing she wore when she was working through something that was costing her more than she was going to show. He knocked on the frame. She looked up. "Do you have a minute?" he said. She studied him for 1 second. "Close the door." He came in, sat down across from her, and put the folder on the desk between them. "Client Operations Performance Summary," he said. "Every number we have 6 weeks of data cross-referenced against the company's historical benchmarks for the same division type." He pushed it toward her. "If Price is going to the board with a case against structural change, this is the counter-argument. It's not an opinion, it's a document." She looked at the folder, then at him. Something moved in her face, not quite what he expected. He'd expected efficiency engagement, the fast professional uptake. What he saw instead was something quieter, something that looked briefly like the effort it takes to hold yourself together when someone does something unexpectedly kind. She pulled the folder toward her and opened it. She went through the first 3 pages in silence. Then she put it flat on the desk and looked at him. "When did you build this?" she said. 40 minutes ago." She was quiet for a moment. "You built this in 40 minutes. "I keep the data current," he said. "It's not a habit I can turn off." Another silence. She looked at the document again. He watched her process it, the precise, methodical quality she brought to numbers, the thing he'd seen in her from the first meeting. Then she sat back. "Price has been on the periphery since the Series B round," she said. "He's never liked how I build. He wants faster ROI cycles, shorter talent investment timelines. He wants to run this company the way you run a hedge fund." She said it without bitterness, just fact clearly stated the way she stated everything. "He's not wrong that there's a risk in what I do. He's just wrong about whether the risk is worth it." "This document makes that argument," Ray said. "Those numbers don't support his thesis. They contradict it directly." She looked at him. "The board chair wants a full performance review next Thursday." "Then you have a week," Ray said. "That's enough time to build something much more comprehensive than this. I can help you build it if you want. Garrett can pull the financial modeling, Yvonne can consolidate the client impact data. You'd have a complete picture: operations, client health, revenue trajectory, every decision you've made in the last 2 years with the outcomes attached." She watched him the way she sometimes watched things, with that quality of attention that wasn't passive, that was actively working at something. "Why are you doing this?" she said. He looked at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you're building a case to protect a decision I made, which was hiring you. There's a version of this where you're just protecting yourself, your position, your team." She said it directly, without accusation, the way she said difficult things, as information, not attack. "I want to know which version this is." He considered the question seriously. He sat with it rather than answering fast, because fast answers to honest questions were usually wrong. "If I wanted to protect my position," he said, "I'd stay out of it. This is a board-level issue. I have zero authority here. Getting involved is a risk for me, not a cover." He paused. "You took a chance on me when you had no logical reason to. You built me something I didn't know I still had in me. The least I can do is show up when it gets difficult." He met her eyes. "That's the version this is." The room was quiet. She held his gaze for a moment that lasted a beat, past professional, and then she looked at the folder. "Okay," she said. Her voice was steady. "Let's build it." They worked through Thursday and into the weekend. Not just the two of them, it was a team effort. Garrett and Yvonne, and 2 of the senior analysts, but Ray was the center of gravity of it, the one who knew where every number lived and how each piece connected to the others. He ran it like an operation. Tasks, distributed timelines, set check-ins, brief and specific, every decision moving toward the single objective. Garrett worked next to him on Saturday afternoon, without comment, for 4 straight hours, and at one point, looked up from his screen and said, "You know, when Diana told me she was hiring someone off a parking lot note, I thought she'd finally lost it." "I was wondering when you'd say that," Ray said without looking up. "I say it now because I was completely wrong." Garrett went back to his screen. "For the record." "Noted," Ray said. On Saturday evening, after everyone else had gone, Ray was alone in the conference room with the full document spread across his laptop when Diana came back. She'd been gone 3 hours. She came in with 2 coffees, her own from somewhere else, a plain black from the shop downstairs that she set next to his hand without asking, and sat down across from him. "How close are you?" she said. 90%. I need the Q2 client retention numbers from Garrett, and 1 more financial model from accounting, both by Monday." He looked up. "It's going to be strong, Diana. The argument is solid." She wrapped both hands around her cup and looked at the table. She was tired, not performing tiredness, actually tired with the particular quality of someone who has been holding tension in their body for several days and is starting to feel the cost of it. "Can I tell you something?" she said. "Of course." I'm not afraid of losing the vote. She said it slowly, feeling for the right words. If the board reviews the performance and decides I'm not the right person, then I'll live with that. I've built enough to land on my feet. A pause. What I'm afraid of is something smaller than that. I'm afraid that the people I've trusted, the team, the clients, are going to spend the next week thinking the thing might not be stable. That fear is contagious, and I can't be the one to stop it from spreading once it starts. Ray looked at her. So we move faster, he said. We don't let it have a week to spread. Get the full picture in front of the board by Tuesday. Don't give Price the timeline he's counting on. She looked up. Tuesday is 2 days away. I know. That's tight, he said. But it's possible. I'll stay tonight. I can have 70% of the final document done by midnight. You send it to Garrett. He pulls the Q2 numbers first thing Monday morning. I finish the integration by noon, and you have the full brief by Monday afternoon. You call the board chair Monday evening. You request the review move to Tuesday. He paused. Don't let Price set the pace. That's his advantage. Take it away. She was looking at him in a way that was harder to read than usual, the professional register still there, but something else underneath it that was closer to the surface than it usually got. You would stay tonight, she said. Yes. Because of what you said before, about showing up when it gets difficult. Yes. A silence. She put her cup down and looked at her hands. Ray. His name in her voice had a different quality than it did in meetings, more weight, less distance. I want to say something, and I need it to land correctly. He waited. I have been running this company for 7 years, she said. In that time, I have not trusted many people the way I trust your read on things. And it's not just professional. It's... She stopped, restarted. You know how people talk about instincts, and they usually mean gut feelings about nothing. That's not what this is. It's the accumulated evidence of 12 weeks of watching you do exactly what you say you're going to do every time without exception. She looked up. That's rare enough that I want to name it. He sat with that. The coffee was warm in his hand. The building was quiet around them. I know what you're not saying, he said quietly. Her eyes were steady on his. Do you? Yes. He set the cup down. And I'm not saying it either, because the timing is wrong, and the context is complicated, and there are too many things working that I'm not willing to risk for something that might not survive outside this building. He said it carefully, without apology, without performance. Just honest. But I'm not going to pretend I don't know what this is. She was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the city moved in its indifferent Friday night way, enormous and unhurried. Okay, she said, softly. Just that word. An acknowledgement that was also an agreement not to act, but to know. To let the knowing be there without trying to force it into a shape it wasn't ready for. Okay, he said. She picked up her cup. He pulled the laptop back in front of him. They sat across from each other in the quiet conference room and worked. And the thing that was between them, named now carefully without drama, settled into the room the way light changes at the end of a day, without announcement, without urgency, but undeniably and completely present. He was home by 1 a.m. Marcus was asleep, which was right and expected. Ray moved through this dark apartment, quietly, dropped his jacket, drank a glass of water at the kitchen sink, stood there in the dark for a moment, with his hands flat on the counter. He thought about what he'd said. I'm not going to pretend I don't know what this is. He thought about the way she'd said, okay, not as punctuation, not as closure, but as a door held open at a careful angle. Enough light to see, not enough to walk through yet. He thought about Ellen. Not with pain the way he used to, the ambush of it, the grief arriving without warning and without mercy. He thought about her with something that had taken 2 years to develop and that he still didn't have a perfect word for. Something like gratitude, like continuity, like the acknowledgement that the love you carry for someone you've lost doesn't disappear to make room for something new. It changes shape, becomes part of the foundation rather than the whole of the structure. Ellen would have been direct about it. She always was. She would have put her hand on his arm the way she did, and she would have said something like, "Ray, you're allowed." Just that. You're allowed. He washed his glass. He went to Marcus's door and looked in the shape of him under the covers, the absolute abandoned completeness of a kid-asleep robotics notebook on the nightstand, pencil still clipped to it. That precision, that seriousness about things other people treated as small. He pulled the door partially closed and went to his own room. He was asleep in under 10 minutes, which was the most solid evidence available that whatever was unresolved in his chest was not keeping him from the things that needed to be done. Monday was a controlled sprint. Garrett delivered the Q2 numbers at 9:15. They were better than projected client retention at 91% in the accounts the team had touched, compared to 74% in the control group. Yvonne's section of the brief was tight and well-sourced. The financial model from accounting closed the last gap Ray had been working around. He had the integrated document together by 11:40 and sent it to Diana at noon with one line, "It's ready. It's good." She called him 4 minutes later. "I've read the executive section." "That's the most important part," he said. "Ray," a pause. "This is going to hold." "I know," he said. "How do you know?" "Because the numbers are real, and the argument follows the numbers. Price's case is built on an assertion. This is built on evidence." He paused. "Evidence wins." A brief silence. "I'm calling the board chair in an hour," she said. "If he agrees to Tuesday, I'll need you on the call." "I'll be there," he said. The board chair agreed to Tuesday. Price, who had been anticipating Thursday, had to accelerate his own preparation by 2 days. Ray had predicted this would matter. It did. The board review on Tuesday was 90 minutes. Ray sat 2 chairs to Diana's left and said almost nothing except when directly asked, and when directly asked, he answered with numbers and timelines and direct references to specific pages in the document, with the economy of a man who understands that in a room like this, precision is the only currency worth spending. The board voted. 6-2. Diana retained full confidence of the board and authorization to continue the client operations expansion. Price left without speaking to anyone. Diana thanked the board members individually, shook hands, exchanged a few words with the chair that Ray didn't hear. When the room cleared, she stood at the end of the table with her hand resting on the back of a chair, and she let out a breath, long, slow, complete, that she'd probably been holding since Wednesday. Garrett was gathering his things across the table. Without looking up, "Good meeting." Yvonne was behind Ray, and she said quietly, "That was the most stressful 90 minutes of my entire professional life." Ray was looking at Diana. She looked up and found him looking, and what crossed her face was something unguarded. Not a smile exactly, but the relaxation of everything that had been held in strict reserve for 6 days, the release of effort that had been costing her consistently since the article dropped. She mouthed 2 words across the table. He was almost certain they were "thank you." Not the professional kind. The other kind. He nodded once. The way you nod at someone when words are too small for what's between you, but something needs to be acknowledged anyway. He picked up his folder and walked out into the hallway, and he stood for a moment outside the conference room, with the city going about its enormous ordinary business beyond the windows. And he understood that something had shifted, not dramatically, not with fanfare, but with the weight and permanence of things that shift when they're ready in the time that they need, and not a moment before. He had shown up when it got difficult. He had done the work and held the line and stayed in the room when the room got hard. And now, on the other side of it, something was different between them. Not larger than what it had been, just clearer. The way a room gets clearer when you turn up the light. He was not going to rush it. He was not going to force the shape of it. But he was also, finally and completely, not going to pretend he didn't know what it was. The weeks after the board vote moved differently. Not faster, not slower, just differently, with a quality that Ray noticed, but couldn't immediately name. Like the air pressure after a storm has passed. Everything the same on the surface, and something fundamentally changed underneath. He went back to work the morning after the vote and ran his team meeting at 9 o'clock and reviewed the Hartfield account follow-up and approved 2 new client response protocols and had lunch at his desk, and none of that was different from any other Wednesday in the past 3 months. But something in the atmosphere of the place had shifted in the way people walked the hallways, in the specific quality of Garrett's emails, which were running 2 or 3 words longer than usual, which for Garrett was the equivalent of writing sonnets. The company felt like itself again, like something that had been braced against impact had allowed itself carefully to relax. Yvonne said it most directly the way Yvonne said most things. She came into his office on a Thursday morning with 2 coffees and set one on his desk and said, "You know the whole floor thinks you saved the company." "The board saved the company," Ray said. "The vote saved the company." "The document saved the company," she said. "You built the document." She sat down across from him. "People notice these things, Ray. Even when you're not watching them notice." He looked at her. "Is there a point you're working toward?" "Just that you should let yourself have it," she said simply. "The credit. The whatever it is you do, instead of accepting that you did something important." She picked up her coffee. "You deflect. You've always deflected. It's a little exhausting for the rest of us." He almost smiled. "How long have you been waiting to say that?" "About 8 weeks," she said pleasantly, and went back to her own desk. He thought about that conversation for the rest of the day. He thought about the way she'd said, "Let yourself have it," the directness of it, the same directness he'd heard from Diana across a conference table, the same directness his son deployed when he decided something needed to be said. He was surrounded apparently by people who said the thing directly, and he had spent the better part of 2 years treating honesty about himself as a luxury he couldn't afford. He was going to work on that. Diana asked him to lunch on a Friday, not a working lunch, she said, and the specification was deliberate. He heard it. He said yes. They went to the same place they'd gone the first time. Paper on the tables. No music loud enough to talk over, and they ordered the same things without discussing it, which was the kind of small unconscious synchronization that says more than most people realize. She was wearing a dark blue coat he hadn't seen before. He noticed and looked away. "How are you?" she said. Not as an opener, as a real question. "Good," he said. Then, actually good. Not the version I said for the first year and a half after Ellen died, where good meant functional and not requiring immediate intervention. He paused. The real version. She smiled at that, a real one, unhurried. "I know the functional, not requiring intervention version," she said. "I spoke it fluently for about 18 months after my marriage ended." He looked up. She'd mentioned the marriage once before briefly and in passing, and he hadn't pushed. He didn't push now either. He waited. 7 years ago, she said. "We were building the company at the same time we were trying to build a life, and it turned out I was better at one of those than the other." She said it without self-pity, just the steady honesty she brought to everything. Thomas was a good man. He deserved someone whose attention wasn't divided every minute of every day. A pause. "I learned a lot about myself in the year after. None of it comfortable, most of it useful." "That sounds right," Ray said. She looked at him. "How does it sound right? You didn't live it." "No," he said. "But I've done the version where you learn things about yourself the hard way. The part where it's not comfortable but it turns out to be useful is something I recognize." He picked up his water. "Ellen's death, I spent the first year just trying not to drown. The second year I figured out where the bottom was. This year I've been learning what it means to be a person again instead of just a function." He said it plainly, the way he'd learned to say difficult things without dressing them up. You don't come out of something like that the same, but if you're honest with it, you come out of it clearer, about what matters, about what you're not willing to waste. She was watching him across the table with that quality of attention that had drawn him to her from the beginning. Not the performance of listening, but the actual thing. "What aren't you willing to waste?" she asked. He looked at her. He thought about the careful silence in the conference room 3 weeks ago, the way they'd named something without naming it and agreed without a single word about it to let it find its time. He thought about the 45 seconds in a parking lot and the 4 sentences on the back of a receipt, and the job that had given him back the man he used to know himself to be. He thought about Marcus, whose robotics team had just qualified for the City Invitational, who was coming back to himself week by week, and who had asked twice in the last month whether Diana was going to come to any of his competitions. Time, he said, and the people who deserve to have it spent on them. She held his eyes for a moment. Then she looked at the table, and something at the corner of her mouth moved that particular expression he'd come to understand as what happened when she felt something she hadn't scheduled. "Okay," she said, softly, the same word she'd said in the conference room. But this time, it meant something different. This time, it was closer to a beginning. "Okay," he said. He told Marcus that night. Not everything. Not the conference room conversation. Not the careful naming of the unnamed thing. Not the accumulated weight of 12 weeks of proximity and trust and the slow recognition of what was building. He wasn't going to give his son all of that. What he gave him was the essential truth, the simplified version that was still the true version. Marcus was at the kitchen table with his robotics notebook, which was his default posture in the evenings, now sketching, calculating, occasionally holding a pencil up at a strange angle, while he stared at the ceiling in the way he stared at the ceiling when he was working through something. Ray sat down across from him. Marcus looked up, registered something in his father's expression, and put the pencil down. "What?" "Diana and I went to lunch today," Ray said. "Not a work thing." Marcus was quiet. Ray watched him process it, the way he always processed things systematically from the outside in. "Okay," Marcus said. "I wanted to tell you directly," Ray said. "Because you matter more than any other variable in this equation, and I don't make moves in my life without at least being honest with you about what I'm thinking." Marcus looked at the table. He was doing the thing he did when he was feeling something he hadn't decided how to express, yet the careful internal sorting. Ray waited, because with Marcus the quality of the wait determined the quality of what came out. "Is it serious?" Marcus said. His voice was steady, 11-year-old steady, which meant it was costing him effort. "It's early," Ray said honestly. "I don't know what it is yet. I know I respect her. I know she's a good person. I know she's been," he searched for the right word, "important, to how this year has gone, for both of us." Marcus was quiet for another moment. Then, "She asked me about robotics." Ray looked at him. "When?" "She came to the office that one time when you forgot your laptop charger and I brought it. She was in the hallway." Marcus picked up his pencil, put it down again. "She asked what year I was, and then she asked if I was in any clubs. I told her about robotics. She asked 3 questions about it, actual questions. Not the kind adults ask when they don't care and they're just being polite." He paused. "She asked what subsystem I was working on, and then she said she'd heard the City Invitational had a new obstacle course format this year, and asked if that changed how I was designing the chassis." He looked up. She knew what a chassis was. Ray sat with that. Diana had mentioned to him briefly that she'd met Marcus. She hadn't described the conversation. She hadn't reported it back. She'd just had it directly the way she did things and moved on. "She's like that," Ray said. "She pays attention." "Yeah." Marcus picked up the pencil again, turned it end over end twice. "I didn't hate it," he said quietly. Which from Marcus delivered in that careful flat tone was the equivalent of a full endorsement. Ray nodded. "Okay. Okay." Marcus went back to the notebook. Then after a moment without looking up, "Dad." "Yeah." "I'm not saying it's the same. She's Mom. That doesn't change." He said it precisely like he'd been thinking about how to say it for a while. But you've been less... He paused, choosing less far away lately, since you started this job. Since you've been... Another pause. I just notice it. That's all. Ray looked at his son. This serious, precise, extraordinary kid who measured his words like they cost money because he'd learned early that the world didn't always give you back what you spent, and who was, despite all of that, still choosing to say the honest thing when it needed to be said. Thank you, Ray said, for telling me that. Marcus shrugged. Don't make it weird, he said, and looked at his notebook. Ray sat there for another minute, not needing to say anything else, which was its own kind of fullness. He called Diana that night at 8:30. She picked up on the second ring. I talked to Marcus, he said. How did that go? He said he didn't hate you. Ray paused. Coming from Marcus, that's essentially a standing ovation. Her laugh came through the phone, warm and unhurried, the real version, not the professional one. He'd been cataloging the difference for weeks without fully admitting it. I'll take it, she said. He mentioned you knew what a chassis was. I had a brief robotics phase in college, she said. Long story. A pause and then, Ray, how are you doing with all of this? He thought about it. Really thought about it the way she deserved. I'm doing better than I thought I'd be doing, he said, which is not something I could have said a year ago about anything. That's a good answer, she said. I mean it. I know you do, she said. That's what makes it good. A brief silence. I want to take this slowly. I want to be honest with you about that up front, not as a warning, but as information, he said. Yes. He could hear the smile in it. As information. I have no interest in fast, he said. Fast is for people who don't understand what they're building. He paused. I've been thinking about this since that conference room, Diana. Since you said okay the first time. I've been thinking about it, and what I know is that whatever this is, it's real. And the real things, the things worth having, you build them carefully. You check your work. You don't skip steps. He stopped. Then, I'm not going anywhere. A silence that was full rather than empty. Neither am I, she said. Ciao. The City Invitational was on a Saturday in March. Marcus's team placed first. The obstacle course, with its new chassis-challenging format, had eliminated 4 of the 7 competing teams in the preliminary round. Marcus's design, which he had been refining for 6 weeks, which had kept the robotics notebook perpetually open on the kitchen table, which had generated more ceiling-staring sessions than Ray could count, performed without a single fault. Ray stood in the gymnasium bleachers and watched his son accept the first-place certificate with the same flat, careful expression he brought to everything, and then turn and find his father in the bleachers. And for 1 second, just 1 second, pure and unguarded, let something show on his face that was the closest thing to uncomplicated joy Ray had seen there in 2 years. Diana was sitting next to Ray. She had asked carefully 2 weeks before, not presuming, not pushing, genuinely asking whether it would be okay. Marcus had been told. Marcus had said with the particular precision of someone who had thought it through, she can come if she wants, which was for Marcus a welcome. When the certificate was handed over, Diana's hand found Ray's arm briefly. Just that. A small, quiet pressure, and then she let go. He looked at her. She was looking at Marcus, something in her face that was warm and specific, not performed. He looked back at his son. He thought about a November morning in a corporate parking lot 6 months ago, the sound of a mirror catching a car door, the cold air, the math he couldn't make work, the 45 seconds of stillness. He thought about the back of a delivery receipt and 4 sentences he'd written with a hand steadier than it had any right to be. He thought about a phone call from an unknown number and a round table set at an angle that said conversation and $236 worth of panel damage that had never actually been paid, because Diana had 3 weeks into his employment told him it had already been handled and that the conversation was over. He thought about Garrett and Yvonne and a board vote and a conference room on a Saturday night and the word okay said twice, and meaning more each time. He thought about Marcus putting his pencil down and saying, "I didn't hate it," and then going back to the notebook because some things didn't need to be more than they were. He thought about Ellen, not with the grief that used to arrive like a fist, but with the steady, present-tense love of someone who carries a person with them into whatever comes next. He thought about what she would have said, her hand on his arm, her specific combination of precision and warmth. "Ray, you did the right thing." Not about any one thing, about all of it. About the note and the honesty and the staying and the showing up and the not pretending to not know what you know. You did the right thing. Marcus looked up at him from the gymnasium floor, certificate in hand, and raised it once, a small, deliberate gesture directed at his father, and Ray pressed his fist briefly to his chest, which was the thing between them, the private signal they'd had since Marcus was 8 years old, and Ellen had still been alive, and the world had been a different size. "I see you. I'm proud. You're mine." Marcus gave him one nod, precise, satisfied, complete, and turned back to his team. Ray sat back in the bleachers. Diana was warm beside him. The gymnasium was loud with other families, other teams, other ordinary, extraordinary moments in progress. Through the high windows, Chicago in March was doing what it always did. Indifferent, enormous, moving in every direction at once, without any particular interest in what was happening inside. But inside, in the specific small radius of a bleacher row on a Saturday in March, something was whole. Not perfect. Ray had lived too much life to mistake wholeness for perfection. There were still bills and bad mornings, and the particular grief that lived in the architecture of his apartment, and in the list on the refrigerator he still hadn't taken down. Marcus still had silences that cost him. Ray still woke sometimes at 3 in the morning with his hand on the empty side of the bed. Diana still had a board and a company and a complexity of demands that would always require more of her than anything else. None of that had been resolved. None of it would be. But wholeness is not the absence of damage. Wholeness is the decision to carry what you carry without letting it carry you, to keep building. Keep showing up. Keep choosing the honest thing when the easier thing is right there, and nobody would blame you for taking it. Ray Calloway had written 4 sentences on the back of a receipt in a cold parking lot at 6 in the morning, because the voice in his chest that sounded like the best version of himself said, "Do it anyway." He had done it anyway. He had done it without knowing what it would cost him or what it would return, without an audience, without expectation, because that was who he was when no one was watching, and the who you are when no one is watching is the only version of yourself that ever builds anything real. Everything that came after the job, the team, the boardroom, the conference room, the woman sitting next to him with her shoulder 3 inches from his, the boy on the gymnasium floor with a first-place certificate, and the ghost of his mother's precision in every deliberate movement. All of it had come from 4 sentences and 45 seconds of choosing right over easy. He had not been watching when it started. He had been watching ever since. And he understood now with the complete and settled clarity of a man who has earned his understanding the hard way that this was not the end of anything. This was exactly and only and completely the beginning.